So now Dr. Bianco will come up and speak about barriers to device approvals in the context of FDA regulatory guidance.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, I want to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present today. And when they gave me this talk about barriers in the medical devices regulatory process, the best keyword there was the FDA, because if this had been the MDR, which is the European agency, I would kill myself. Anyway, the FDA is the nice kid on the block, believe it or not, and it's very straightforward. And you know, these are my disclosures first and foremost. And it all comes from the Food and Federal Cosmetic Act back in 1938, which was signed into law by President Roosevelt. And that came out of adverse events that were associated with sulfanilamide, and where a lot of people die. And the focus of the federal government was really to establish a agency that could prevent such disasters, ensure safety and efficacy for the population. So protect the consumers. The clinical amendments that are critical are the one from 1962, which was directed at the drug industry to really, or pharma industry, to really ensure effectiveness and not just safety. And then the ones from 1976 that was tailored to medical devices itself. From there, the FDA becomes the agency to do this. They have what's called the Federal Register, which is the official publication where everything gets published every day or reviewed, and where the updates come. And from there, the CFR, or the Federal Regulations, or the Code of Federal Regulations, which gives us the cookbook of the things that you can do, you not do, and how you implement it. And for better knowledge, you need to have what's called a quality management system for each of these devices, where you guys going to monitor over time. Let me ask a quick question here. How many of people in the audience consider themselves or want to be like innovators, inventors, or change in many ways what we want to do? I mean, what's being done. Okay, so I dedicate this talk to all of you, because this is, you know, this is the ugly side of things when we go into these things, but necessary, however, I must say. So Title 21, Chapter 9 is the one that enforces into medical devices. And essentially, they look for everything, even for ways you manufacture, how you repackage, how you relabel, how you distribute these things, how you import. And those things are critical. As Dr. Mark Antonini referred, there's 3 types of medical devices. I mean, class 1 is basically a spoon. You know, you come up with a new spoon, you put it in your Cysto set, and you pick up the chips from a TUR. The only thing you need to tell the FDA is that I have a new spoon. No problem there. Things start getting a little bit more complicated as you go with class 2 and class 3 devices. Class 2 itself has 3 subdivisions. And essentially, you need to have what's called a pre-market notification if you come in with a new device. The good news there is that you usually have a predicate. There's something that exists already. And if it's completely new, well, that is like, you know, making the new frontier, but most of them tag along, right? And the class 3 devices, then they need pre-market approval. That's the critical one. You have to go through the IDE process that was shown before. And anything that goes into the body, pretty much, you could say it as a class 3, with some exception as a class 2. But if it's a treatment intent, they will fall under class 3, especially if they stick and stay. So there's a series of requirements that go through registration, listing, pre-market notifications, unless accepted, and then investigational device exemptions. Sometimes you can get those, labeling, whatever. So as you go through the submission process, especially when you have to do a pre-market notification for class 2 or class 3, okay, you will have to go through a series of requirements, including the description, the comparison to other devices, and then the performance. So you need to keep close tabs of what your device is doing and how it's evolving, and depending on what type of device it is, you may have, you know, what we call lab or dry runs, and then before you take it really into clinical practice. The main difference between class 2 and class 3 is that you're doing a notification, a pre-market notification, then you can get an IRB for your research, and that's enough. If you're going into a Class 3 device, which requires a pre-market authorization, you need the blessings from the FDA and your IRB. So that will take a little bit longer. When you go through the review process, there's several things that occur as you go, right? I mean, essentially you start your submission, and then, you know, the FDA will review this, and they will come back. The critical word is or. Because when they use the or word, they means that they can hold it up, they can do some other things, so it's the alternative. And that what takes time with these devices and sometimes shows the variations in the path of approval, all right? And it has to do with whether they finally accept it or they review, you make changes, you had another meeting, you get into another call, and that's weeks and weeks and weeks, if not months. This is the FDA 510 submission story over the last 20 years, and you could see that it takes about, they clear about 3,000 of devices of 510Ks a year, and I really want to thank one of our contributors, Richard Foster, who really provided a lot of this data for me for this talk. And even COVID, they were pretty regular doing this. So in general, across the board, the average time to clear goes between 5 and 6 months. So when you submit a new device, the first question is whether it's a completely new device, which most of the times the answer is no. There's some sort of predicate or something that does something similar that you want to improve. And then the question becomes, is there a change that significantly improves the safety or effectiveness of the device? If the answer is yes, then you have to go through the process. If the answer is no, okay, the device is not having substantial change, then you get tested again whether you are now doing a labeling change. So when you see label, think about indication. So it's the same way that, for example, the beginning, right, Viagra was indicated for pulmonary hypertension and then for erectile dysfunction, and then they use it for other things, right? So it's kind of like the same way. There's the indication, and then there is, which is the label, and then some drugs or devices are used off-label, right? So anyway, if your device is not having a significant change in what's called instruction for use or the performance claims, then you go to the next test, which is, does the change in the device or the new device has impact in technology, engineering, or performance in terms of effectiveness and safety? If the answer is yes, you have to do a full new or amend your 510K. If the answer is no, then you go to the materials question, which is if the users are being exposed to, because of new materials, to carcinogens, other things, does the new materials impose some safety hazards? Do they have the same durability or the same efficacy? And then if the answer is no, then you have to essentially write it down in your QMS and document it very well, and eventually you'll be audited by the FDA, and they do this consistently and effectively, actually. But you move along. If the answers are yes, then you go into a new submission. For urology, or in the field of urology and focal therapy, there are really two major FDA columns that we have to go through with medical devices. One has to do with gastroenterology, urology, which are lined up in under the same category, and the other one is in radiology. This chart shows the submissions and clearance for the gastroenterology, urology. Unfortunately, they don't break it down over the last 20 years. And again, it's about an average of 160 new submissions every year. Or approval, clearance, not submission, but clearance. And it takes about 5 months, but it could last up to 2 years, and that's what you want to prevent. And the best way to prevent this is notifying to the FDA, what are you going to do, and have a talk with them, and even present them your protocol or trial or idea, and get immediate feedback so you don't have to get it in the tail end where sometimes it doesn't work. For radiology, in the last 20 years, there have been about an average of 375 clearances, and it takes about 3 to 4 months, but it can take, again, up to 2 years. So careful planning is warranted and advised, and is in your best interest. What has been changing, however, is the requirements asked by the FDA, which you can see here from 2002 to 2019, but in this next slide, you can see it from 2022 to 2024. So I guess the FDA got more people or they got busier, but they're changing things a lot. They're changing requirements, and that makes it harder sometimes because as the rules change, then you have to adjust and you have to keep tabs on this. And they get published on that Federal Register that I explained before. But over a course of 17 years, right, there were 7 changes. Over the course of the last 2 years, there have been 8 new changes, and a lot of this are going to get even more stringent because of we know what's happening with AI. So this is how a device gets classified. Example, I use an example for fusion devices since they're prevalent in this meeting, and one of the core things that we do in focal therapy or target therapy. And this is the specific approval of fusion-related devices across the board by the Radiology FDA board. About 85 of these devices every year, and it takes, again, 5 to 6 months, but it could take up to 9 months. I mean, a little bit better than the average. So when we go over the hurdle to clear or the classifications, we look at the newer regulations, and this is the documentation that you go through, a lot of codes and things, just to try to keep that device that you're trying to pull through the FDA. Now, we know what AI is doing, and this is a good example of the future of AI and the amount of submissions AI related to the FDA, and more importantly, I mean, they're mostly radiology as of now. This will probably continue to change, but that is the board that has gotten more busy and busy with approvals, and they're doing more recently. It started with breast and then moved to other organs, prostate, brain. So it's one of the areas that is more hot in this area. So class 3 devices are a particular type on its own because they really require what we said before, the pre-market application, pre-market approval application with scientific regulatory documentation to demonstrate the safety and effectiveness. And again, this applies to a lot of energy devices, things that go into the body, that stick into the body, or that you put in and you may remove. And you need to have a tight control of that. You should have clinical registers of this. An example is the Society of Vascular Surgery took over the registers that were used in Massachusetts back in the early 2000s when they were doing hip replacement and knee replacements and all. Sorry, not the hip. I got confused. The vascular replacements for any stent and things like that. Now, it is important to understand that a 510 approval is not a label. So again, just because you got a 510 approval doesn't mean you have an indication. And this is the last part, but perhaps one of the last slides, but perhaps one of the most important ones in my view. Okay, so we know that in order to get devices approved, we just spoke about, we have to do trials. Phase 1, safety, phase 2, efficacy and safety, phase 3, mass testing, showing efficacy and safety. So for medical devices in general, especially class 3, we should encourage to go through the front door. And the front door is randomized clinical trials that actually shows that the device makes a difference. And therefore, they will eventually get approval by the FDA if they don't get grandfather in. So in the field of focal therapy, this is particularly important for all of us, because really there's only one device that we can speak that's gone through the front door, which is cryoablation, because it's been done since the 1800 and then 1900, and then in the 90s really got not only the 510 clearance, but it got the indication for prostate cancer. Other devices have not been able to get that. So the new way to try to achieve that label or indication is through what we call the clinical guidelines. And clinical guidelines are great, however, they come from, many academic, societal, and industry influences. And it's not the preferred method, really, to get this device approved. I will encourage everybody who works with companies that do energy devices and are aspiring to use them in kidney and prostate, that's pertinent to this meeting, and then other organs, that really go through the front door where the clinical route is. Because that's where you can get that indication, make your process easier, and not the other ones. where there's many pitfalls and potential dangers. Anyway, it's not FDA guarantee, by the way, so there will be always a discrepancy. So in summary, we discussed about medical class devices as shown by Dr. Antonini before and ourselves, and here the 510 contents of the submission, which is the description. You compare it to a predicate, you show that it's as effective and maybe more safe, or why it's different and why it should be used. You make your argument. You go through the process or the alternative options, and that may take time, but in general, most devices will get approved over a 6-month window, and that's a good thing. And in regards of the requirements by the FDA are substantially less than what's needed nowadays in other parts of the world. And then the device gets classified, and finally AI is being the driving force, and we should keep this in mind, so we encourage that everything that comes in comes through the front door, not the back one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.